Someone once told me that the West has given too much of its culture to the ideology of liberalism, that it's too late, and that there's no coming back. And this conversation prompted me to, well, one, understand what liberalism is, but number two, understand what he meant by it's too late to come back. And I realized that what he was talking about was we've given too much of our Christian ideology to the liberal ideology. And I had to go forth and do the effort of trying to understand the distinction between the two. And I came across the work of a man named Isaiah Berlin, who posits that there are two types of liberty or freedom. And he categorized these as positive and negative liberty. And negative liberty is what he would associate with the liberal ideology, which is the idea that society should be run in such a way that people have the freedom to do whatever they want, as long as nobody gets hurt and all parties consent. That's negative liberty. And then there's positive liberty, which he correlates with the Christian worldview, which is that society should be run in such a way that people have the freedom to do what they ought to do, or the freedom to do what is right. And once I read that, it clicked for me why the Christian and the liberal worldviews just cannot be reconciled. Because with the liberal worldview, the main line of morality is as long as no one gets hurt. But with the Christian worldview, the line is such that people operate in a way that, at the end of their lives, they're going to be judged on Judgment Day. And that if they continue in their sin, they're going to be sent into damnation. And as such, the level of morality is going to differ. Let me give you an example of the irreconcilability and why the two worldviews just can't coincide in the culture. You see, in the Christian worldview, the right thing to do when seeing someone proactively engage in continual acts of sin would be to get them to stop. But in the liberal worldview, it's no, everybody gets to do whatever they want. There is no sense of where their soul is going to go. And so that's why this sort of liberalism has permeated throughout the culture, because, well, it lets people do whatever they want. And that's why it's so at odds with the Christian paradigm. And so I had to look deeper. Well, what are the many things that cannot be reconciled with liberalism and Christianity, or the Christian worldview? And I found the four most controversial subjects, and they're as follows. Number one is abortion. Number two is sexual liberation. Number three is gender stereotypes. And number four, gay marriage. And I'll go through them in order, and I'll explain why they can't come together on an agreement. With the case of abortion, the popular culture stance is my body, my choice. Everybody essentially gets to posit their own value on the life inside the womb. But the Christian worldview posits that the value of the human life pre-exists the actual conception. For example, in Jeremiah 1:5, when God is talking, I believe, to the prophet Jeremiah, he says in that verse, "Before you were formed in the womb, I knew you." And albeit this doesn't outright ban abortion, but what it does do is it shows the value of human life. It shows that God, even before you existed, valued and loved you. And in fact, I believe it's in 1 John chapter 4, we love because he first loved us. And it's a call for all of us humans, whether we're religious or not, to love all humans from conception, because God's love for us pre-existed our existence here on earth. And so whether you're religious or not, the value and the love that we should have for human beings should be such that if God loves us before we were conceived, then we should love and care for human life from the moment of conception. And so that's where you're at odds with the world as far as Christianity is concerned. And then we have sexual liberation. And this one's probably pretty obvious, but I don't think it's obvious the extent to which it's done damage to the culture and to how the average everyday Christian operates. In Matthew 19, verse 6, I believe, the verse talks about how in marriage the two become one. The man and the woman come together and become one flesh. And this is obviously an allure to the act of sex. And I think essentially you can derive from that the level of intimacy that is being described in this particular verse, right? That it's not just an act of two people coming together for each other's pleasure, but that they're actually becoming one. And so what the culture says is that no, sex has a relative meaning and that it's just a thing people do to feel good. But, you know, even as a liberal, you can see how that just makes no sense, because, I mean, as far as intimate activities go, being naked with another person in a private space is about as intimate as you can get with another human being. And sex is either intimate or it's not. And it's very hard to argue that it's not, even if you are very, very woke. It's hard to just not see that. But here we have a ideology that runs counter to what the culture says, which is that, you know, sex has meaning that is relative and that there's no objective value beyond just the feeling goodness of it. But if we're to look at the words of, say, Jesus, I believe in Matthew chapter 5, where he says, I say any man who looks at a woman with lust commits adultery with her in his heart. There we see that, you know, even the supposedly greatest teacher ever to exist has something to say about the spirit behind lustful intentions. And then again in 2 Timothy 2:22, we have the verse, flee also youthful lust. You see, what the culture says is that sexual expression is perfectly okay, it's perfectly acceptable, and nothing should get in the way of being able to express ourselves. But that runs so counter to what the Christian worldview is, which is that we shouldn't allow this level of sexual expression because it entices the capacity to commit sins of lust. And I'll even go further and make a more conservative claim, which is that even the culture of casual dating, of Victoria's Secret models and bikini baristas, all of that leads to one of two things, which is the enticement of lust and genuine heartbreak. And by casual dating, I don't just mean the act of dating. I mean dating with no sense of reverence. Dating not even to marry, but just for the sake of pleasure. Because by its logic, it can only lead to heartbreak, and you know that's true. And I bring that up because the slow encroachment of the liberal ideology takes away the seriousness of just about anything. Nothing is held sacred. Relationships aren't held sacred. They're almost held to an extent that as long as you can get something from it, then that's the only reason it's valid. And that's not what the Bible teaches, and that's not what the Christian worldview believes, which is just another impasse between the two ideologies. And so for the next one, regarding gender stereotypes, we have 1 Corinthians 11:9, I believe is the verse. And it says, I believe outright, that woman is made for the man. Which, as far as the culture goes, already there's another impasse. But, I mean, that's not as simple as it sounds. I mean, you read everything in context. I mean, it's a call for men to lead, for men to be at the head of the marriage, the same way that Christ is the head of the church. And as I've gotten older, I've come to realize that it's the most accurate description of how natural attraction works. Let me put it this way. Men like women who are submissive, who are gentle, kind, sweet, soft, caring, nurturing, motherly, wise, etc. In the same way that women like men who are leaders, who are competent, strong, wise, discerning, masculine, honor-bound, virtuous, fatherly. And you would be hard-pressed to find evidence against that, except for maybe exceptions, but exceptions don't make the rule. And my point in bringing this up is because, again, this is another impasse of ideology that just can't be reconciled. And it's not to say that women who are masculine are sinners and, are going to be sent to hell, or that men who are feminine are going to, be sent to hell because of that. No, it's to say that the ideology themselves are at such contradictions that it's hard to reconcile that. And then we have the final point I'm going to make, which is probably my most controversial take, which is the case against gay marriage. And with gay marriage, it's pretty obvious that Christians think gay marriage is wrong, and there's a reason for that. But I'm not even going to take this from a theological approach, because it's pretty obvious that Christianity does not believe gay marriage is right. That's a given. But I'm going to argue this from a historical, political standpoint. The only evidence in human history that marriage was conducted between two people of the same sex or gender was, I believe, in 54 AD, when Emperor Nero of the Roman Empire married two men, and even that was pretty thoroughly mocked. And that's about the only clear, concrete evidence I could find. And the reason for that is because marriage has always belonged to the religions, whether it's Christianity or Jewish or Islam or any of the pagan religions. Marriage has always been, first and foremost, a concept of religion. And then secondly, the other consistent thing is that it has always been between man and woman. And it wasn't until, I believe, 1913 with the Revenue Act in the United States that the government here in the US began to define it. And then slowly, over the course of time, started to encroach itself in how marriage will be laid out, and essentially laid out the terms for marriage. And, well, I don't think it's done any help. As far as the government is concerned, it hasn't exactly been fruitful in fostering long-term, healthy, beautiful relationships that seek the thriving of families and individuals. So that's been no help. So aside from tax benefits, I'm not entirely sure what the covenant you are ascribing to when there isn't any theology attached to it. Because when you're a non-believer of anything, say you're agnostic and everything's relative, you're just getting married, your covenant is between the two people, yes, but the whole point of the marriage was always that it was a covenant between you and God. And that, that God would be the thing that ties you two together, because when it's just you two, you become each other's idols, and there's no way, when there's no third party to kind of keep you together, except for the government, then the whole thing is just bound to fall apart, because there's no genuine structure. Right? So in Christianity, you have Christ, who is at the head of the church. Then from there, right, the man has an example to look to, and the woman has an example to look to, and from there, they have kids, and the hierarchy kind of makes sense. But with a non-religious marriage, you don't necessarily have anything there, because you're just essentially roommates that live together for the sake of tax benefits. And of course, there's more to it than that, and there's a lot more nuance. But again, that's just another irreconcilable difference between the Christian and the liberal worldview. And so the question remains, well, how do we live together? Well, for the Christian, it's by doubling down, gently and wisely. Take it back to the beginning with the idea of positive and negative liberty. With positive liberty, it's the freedom to do what you ought to do. But with negative liberty, it does have a wider range in which you can operate, which means that us positive liberists have room to work. Because if we let people continue to engage in things that lead to the ruin of their souls at the end of their lives, I mean, that in itself is a sin. And it's very hard to understand that unless you understand the Christian worldview and the kind of sincerity that comes with the Great Commission of Christianity, which is to make disciples of the nations. But really what I want to get at is that we humans have a morality that ultimately leads to God. And, you're not a Christian and you're watching this video and you made it this far. Well, I thank you for listening, but I encourage you to understand Christianity. Not by trying to prove God exists, but by understanding why God exists. And a great resource for this is a book by C.S. Lewis called Mere Christianity. And there he lays out a very logical and genuine argument for why God needs to exist. And when you do that, I think things will begin to make sense as far as why Christians fight so hard to get people to repent and believe in Jesus Christ. In the meantime, God bless, and get out there and make better happen daily.